Everything ended in a parked car. Was sitting alone in the driver's seat, engine off, hands shaking so badly I had to wedge my phone against the steering wheel to keep it steady. My banking app was open, glowing too bright in the dim afternoon light, and the number I expected to see simply wasn't there. Where there should have been a long, carefully built balance, there was nothing. Zero. A blank space where years of effort used to live. I refreshed the screen once, twice, again. That money was never just money. It was extra shifts I picked up when my body begged for rest. It was weekends I worked while other families took trips. It was birthdays celebrated small, dinners stretched thin, and clothes worn a little longer than planned. It was quiet promises I whispered to my daughter when she fell asleep, promises that her future would be safer than my past. Seeing that number vanish felt like watching time itself get erased. At first, my brain refused to accept it. I told myself the app was glitching, the signal was weak, the system was down. I closed it and reopened it, fingers numb, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. Then came the nausea, a slow rolling wave that made my stomach drop as the truth crept closer. This wasn't an error. This was real. Embarrassment hit next, sharp and humiliating. I felt foolish for trusting so completely, for believing that careful planning was enough. Anger followed, hot and sudden, but it had nowhere to go. I was frozen there, trapped between the steering wheel and a reality I didn't want to face. The silence inside the car felt loud, pressing in on me from all sides. There was one person who had access to that account. One person I trusted more than anyone else alive. My own mother. Even thinking that felt wrong, like a betrayal in itself. I had spent my life believing family meant safety, that blood automatically came with protection. Saying her name in my head made my chest tighten, because part of me already knew what it meant. I stared at the screen again, searching for any sign I was wrong. I wanted a delay, a reversal, a miracle. I wanted to be embarrassed later for overreacting. Instead, my phone vibrated in my hand. The screen lit up with an incoming call. Her name. Bright. Familiar. Unavoidable. For a few seconds, I didn't move. I watched the phone buzz, my reflection staring back at me from the dark glass. I could ignore it. I could let it ring. I could pretend I hadn't seen anything yet. But deep down, I knew this was the moment where pretending would end. I took a breath that didn't feel big enough, pressed answer, and held the phone to my ear. In that suspended moment, memories rushed in without permission. I thought about childhood dinners, long talks, and every time she told me she would always protect me. I remembered trusting her voice over my own instincts, believing experience automatically meant wisdom. Sitting there, I felt grief for the version of my mother I wanted her to be, not the one reality was revealing. My throat tightened as fear mixed with responsibility, because this wasn't only about me anymore. A child was depending on my next move. I realized that whatever waited on the other end of the call would force me to choose between comfort and truth. The car felt smaller, the air heavier, as if the universe was holding its breath with me. I wiped my face, steadied my hands, and prepared myself to hear whatever came next. Nothing felt accidental anymore, and denial finally slipped away completely in that moment. Had no idea that single call would permanently change what family meant to me. Before everything collapsed, I believed stability was something you could build slowly, like a wall laid brick by brick. I was a single parent, tired but determined, convinced that discipline and patience mattered more than luck. I planned everything. I budgeted carefully. I believed showing up consistently would protect my daughter from chaos. I wasn't chasing luxury. I was chasing predictability, safety, and a future that didn't feel fragile. Every decision I made revolved around creating something solid she could stand on later. I told myself that if I stayed focused and responsible, nothing truly bad could happen. That belief kept me moving forward, even on days when exhaustion felt heavier than hope. I thought hard work could outpace risk if I stayed vigilant enough. My relationship with my mom existed inside that belief system, complicated but deeply trusted. She had always been the voice in my ear, guiding me, correcting me, reminding me of sacrifices she claimed to have made. I grew up absorbing her advice, even when it felt heavy with guilt. Over time, that dynamic turned into emotional dependence I didn't fully recognize. She positioned herself as my safety net, my moral compass, the person who always knew better because she had lived longer. When I doubted myself, she filled the silence. When I hesitated, she reassured me. I confused familiarity with safety and history with trust. Questioning her felt unnatural, almost disloyal, like questioning gravity itself. I didn't realize how much power I handed over simply by never pushing back. As a parent, I tried to teach my daughter the lessons I wished I had learned earlier. We talked about saving, about planning ahead, about not living beyond your means. I wanted her to see money as a tool, not a source of fear. I believed I was breaking generational cycles by being intentional instead of reactive. I showed her charts, jars, small goals that added up over time. I wanted her to grow up believing the future was something you could prepare for, not something that ambushed you. In doing that, I felt proud. I felt like I was finally doing something right, building something that would last longer than me. My values were simple, and I wore them openly. Loyalty mattered. Family mattered. Trust mattered. I believed commitment meant sticking together without needing proof or paperwork. I trusted family over contracts and loyalty over signatures. If someone shared my blood, I assumed shared responsibility followed naturally. That belief shaped how I handled everything, from finances to emotional boundaries. I thought love automatically came with accountability. I never imagined those values could be used against me. At the time, they felt noble, even protective. Looking back now, I understand how easily principles become weaknesses when someone else decides to exploit them quietly. There were warning signs, of course, but I dismissed them without much effort. Comments that felt entitled. Advice that leaned too heavily on control. Moments where her concern crossed into ownership. Each time, I explained it away. She meant well. She was just worried. She had more experience. Questioning her felt like betrayal, like ingratitude. I told myself discomfort was normal and temporary. I didn't want conflict. I didn't want to believe someone so close to me could cause harm intentionally. So I chose silence and called it peace. What I didn't understand then was how trust can turn into a blindfold when worn for too long. It blocks your peripheral vision. It narrows your awareness. It makes obvious dangers invisible because acknowledging them would shatter everything you thought was safe. I believed trust was strength. I didn't realize it could also be a liability. That blindfold felt warm and familiar, until the moment it slipped. That blindfold would cost me more than money. The college fund didn't appear overnight. It was built slowly, deliberately, one small decision at a time. I started it when my daughter was still little, when the idea of college felt far away but important enough to prepare for early. At first, it was modest. A few dollars here. A little extra there. Nothing dramatic. Just consistency. I treated it like a promise I was making to her and to myself. Every deposit meant choosing the future over the present, saying no to something I wanted so she could say yes to something later. Over time, those choices added up in ways that felt powerful. Each contribution represented something I gave up quietly. A newer phone I didn't buy. A trip I postponed. Meals stretched across more days than planned. I didn't resent those sacrifices. In fact, they made me feel grounded. Watching the balance grow gave me peace. It meant I was doing my job as a parent. It meant I was creating a buffer between my daughter and uncertainty. That account wasn't about prestige or pressure. It was about safety. Knowing it existed helped me sleep at night. Emotionally, that fund became more than numbers on a screen. It symbolized stability in a life that often felt unpredictable. It was proof that effort mattered and that planning could actually protect someone you love. Whenever I felt overwhelmed, I reminded myself that at least one thing was moving in the right direction. No matter what else happened, that account stood there quietly, growing, waiting. It became a private source of pride I didn't talk about much, because it felt personal, almost sacred. My mom didn't become involved all at once. It happened gradually, through conversations that felt harmless at the time. She asked questions. She offered advice. She shared opinions about finances and responsibility, all framed as concern for my daughter. She made it clear she thought ahead more than I did, that she had seen how quickly things could go wrong. Her suggestions sounded practical, even loving. I didn't hear alarms. I heard experience. Over time, she positioned herself as protection against my own potential mistakes. She talked about oversight, about having another set of eyes. She said shared access would make things safer, not riskier. She framed it as teamwork, as family supporting family. She reminded me of stories where people lost everything because they trusted the wrong institutions or didn't plan carefully enough. Compared to that, trusting your own mother felt logical. I told myself that refusing would seem paranoid, maybe even ungrateful. What made it easier was how normal it all felt. There was no pressure, no urgency, no dramatic moment. Just steady reassurance. She spoke calmly, confidently, like this was something parents did for each other. She never raised her voice or demanded control. She simply made it sound like common sense. Looking back, that's what scares me most. Nothing felt rushed or reckless. There was no sense of danger. It felt responsible, adult, mature. I remember thinking I was being smart, not cautious. I thought shared access was an extra layer of security, not a vulnerability. I trusted her judgment more than my own hesitation. I believed love was enough protection. That illusion of safety wrapped itself around me so completely that I stopped questioning it altogether. Even now, as I recount it, the calmness of that period feels unreal. Because once you know how it ends, it's hard to remember how safe it once felt. The truth is, the trap didn't snap shut immediately, but it was already set. The warning signs didn't arrive loudly. They slipped in quietly, disguised as comments that felt easy to excuse. At first, they sounded like reflections, things said in passing. My mom would talk about sacrifice, about everything parents give up, and how that kind of effort is rarely appreciated. She spoke about it with a tired tone that made me feel sympathy instead of concern. I nodded along, believing she was just venting. I didn't hear ownership in her words yet. I heard exhaustion, then came comments about entitlement, always framed carefully. She would mention how children grow up and forget who helped them get there. How parents are often left behind after giving their best years. None of it was directed at me explicitly, but it lingered in the air. I told myself she was speaking generally, not personally. I assumed she was processing her own disappointments, not laying emotional groundwork. There were moments when she referred to the college fund indirectly, talking about it as if it were a shared achievement rather than something I built alone. She used phrases that blurred the lines, saying things like "we worked hard for that" or "everything I helped you do." At the time, I translated that as pride. I wanted to believe she felt invested in my daughter's future the same way I did. It didn't occur to me that she was mentally rewriting ownership. Whenever a comment made me uncomfortable, I found a reason to dismiss it. I blamed stress. I blamed generational differences. I told myself older people speak differently about money and family. Sometimes I even convinced myself she was joking, that I was being too sensitive. I had grown used to minimizing my reactions around her. It was easier to laugh things off than to question intent. Conflict felt heavier than confusion, so I avoided it. She often framed herself as the victim of her own life story. Conversations drifted toward what she didn't have, what she lost, what never worked out. She spoke about aging with fear and uncertainty, about needing stability. Without ever asking directly, she implied responsibility. I felt it settle on my shoulders quietly. She never said I owed her, but the suggestion hovered there, unspoken and powerful. I carried that weight without realizing how it was shaping my decisions. Confronting her felt impossible. Even imagining it made my chest tighten. Guilt followed every critical thought, reminding me of everything she had done, everything she claimed to have sacrificed. I was afraid of being labeled ungrateful or dramatic. I feared the emotional fallout more than the discomfort of staying silent. So I chose peace over clarity, again and again. I convinced myself that avoiding conflict was maturity, not avoidance. Looking back now, I can see how manipulation often wears the mask of concern. It sounds caring. It feels familiar. It doesn't announce itself as danger. These moments didn't trigger alarms. They triggered unease, a low-level discomfort I learned to live with. I normalized it, folded it into daily life, and told myself that families are complicated. I didn't realize that discomfort is often the body recognizing a boundary being crossed quietly. At the time, none of it felt urgent. Nothing felt threatening. It just felt slightly off, like a shoe that never quite fit but was worn anyway. I adjusted instead of replacing it. I adapted instead of asking why it hurt. That decision, repeated enough times, created space for something worse to grow, because the next sign wasn't subtle at all. I go back to the moment when denial finally collapsed. I called my mom, keeping my voice steady, choosing calm because I still hoped there was a misunderstanding. I explained what I saw on the account, carefully, like facts alone could undo whatever happened. I gave her space to correct it, to say it was a mistake, a temporary transfer, anything that would let me breathe again. I wanted to believe there was a reasonable explanation waiting just beneath the surface. Her reaction wasn't explosive. It wasn't angry or defensive. It was relaxed. Almost casual. That alone unsettled me. She didn't ask how I was feeling. She didn't sound surprised. Instead, she sighed like I had interrupted her day with something trivial. When I explained how scared I was, how that money was meant for my daughter, she brushed it off. She told me I was overreacting, that I was being dramatic. The loss, according to her, wasn't as serious as I made it sound. As I pressed for clarity, her language shifted. She started talking about everything she had done for me over the years. Every sacrifice. Every favor. Every moment she believed she stepped in when no one else would. She reframed the money as something she had earned emotionally, if not officially. She spoke as if taking it was natural, inevitable, even fair. In her version of reality, the fund wasn't stolen. It was reclaimed. I felt my panic rise, but she stayed calm, which somehow made it worse. I told her this wasn't about me, that it was about my daughter's future. She responded by minimizing that too, saying things would work out, that kids are resilient, that I'd figure it out like I always do. There was no apology. No hesitation. Just reassurance that I would adapt to the damage she caused. Then her tone changed again. It softened, then tilted toward amusement. She chuckled lightly, as if the tension in my voice was ironic. That sound, brief and careless, landed harder than any insult could have. It wasn't nervous laughter. It wasn't discomfort. It was entertained disbelief that I was still upset. In that moment, the betrayal became undeniable. She laughed about money that represented years of discipline and a child's future. Something inside me broke quietly. It wasn't explosive. It was clean, like a cord snapping under too much strain. That laugh stripped away every illusion I still held. This wasn't confusion or desperation. This was contempt. She didn't just take the money. She dismissed what it meant. She treated my fear like a punchline. I realized I wasn't speaking to my mother anymore, at least not the version I thought I knew. I was hearing someone who felt entitled, someone who believed my boundaries were optional. The warmth I associated with her vanished instantly, replaced by clarity that felt cold and sharp. I stopped searching for empathy in her voice and started listening to what she was actually saying. She seemed surprised when I went quiet. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry or plead. I didn't argue. I simply stopped reacting. The absence of emotion confused her more than anger ever could. She expected chaos, not silence. In that stillness, I understood something important. The relationship I thought I had was already gone. What remained was a problem I needed to solve, not a bond one needed to protect. I ended the call politely, which only deepened her confusion. I sat there afterward, staring forward, feeling grief settle in my chest alongside resolve. The betrayal hurt, but the clarity was undeniable. I had crossed a line internally that I couldn't uncross. I knew then that nothing would ever be the same again, but I didn't scream or beg, and that surprised her. Shock doesn't disappear all at once. For me, it thinned out slowly, like fog lifting just enough to see what was directly in front of me. After that call ended, I didn't spiral the way I expected. I didn't keep arguing. I didn't send angry messages. Something colder and steadier took over. I realized that reacting emotionally wouldn't bring the money back or protect my daughter. So I stopped talking and started watching. I let the silence do its work while I shifted into survival mode. The first thing I did was document everything. I took screenshots of account balances, transaction histories, and access logs. I saved messages, emails, and notes from past conversations that suddenly felt different in hindsight. I stopped relying on memory and started building a record. Every detail mattered now. Dates, times, amounts. The more I looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't impulsive. It was structured. Planned. That realization hurt more than the loss itself. Went through bank statements line by line, tracing movement I had never questioned before. Small transfers. Timing that coincided with specific conversations. Patterns that only make sense once you know where to look. I felt sick recognizing how long it had been happening without my awareness. What I thought was a single moment of betrayal revealed itself as a series of quiet decisions made behind my back. Each discovery chipped away at the last traces of denial. Messages I once read casually now felt loaded. Advice sounded less like guidance and more like positioning. Reassurance looked like distraction. Seeing it all laid out forced me to confront an uncomfortable truth. This wasn't confusion or desperation. It was calculated. Accepting that felt like mourning someone who was still alive. I grieved the version of my mother I thought I knew while staring at proof that said otherwise. There was an internal battle that played out every night. Part of me wanted to protect her, to minimize what I was seeing, to keep the peace. Another part of me looked at my daughter sleeping and felt clarity sharpen. That conflict exhausted me until one side finally won. Protecting my child mattered more than protecting an image. Once that decision settled, everything became simpler, even if it wasn't easier. I sought guidance quietly, without alerting anyone. I spoke to financial professionals. I asked questions carefully. I learned what options existed and what risks remained. I didn't frame it as revenge. I framed it as damage control. Every step I took was about containment and prevention. I wasn't trying to punish. I was trying to survive this without losing more than I already had. Each document I collected felt like reclaiming a piece of control that had been taken from me. The chaos began to organize itself into facts. Fear loosened its grip. Panic gave way to focus. The more information I gathered, the calmer I became. Knowledge replaced uncertainty. That calmness didn't come from confidence. It came from preparation. I realized then that staying composed wasn't weakness. It was leverage. While she assumed I was still emotional, still hurt, still confused, I was building something solid underneath the surface. Every screenshot, every timeline, every confirmation strengthened my position. I stopped feeling powerless. I started feeling ready, and what I discovered next changed the entire direction of my plan. The discovery didn't come from confrontation. It came quietly, through a conversation I almost didn't have. I was double-checking details when a relative hesitated on the phone, then asked me a careful question that didn't make sense at first. The pause in their voice told me everything before the words did. When I pressed gently, the truth surfaced in fragments. This hadn't started with me. It hadn't ended with me either. What I uncovered reframed the entire story. This wasn't a desperate, one-time decision made under pressure. It was part of a pattern that stretched back years. Other family members had similar experiences, smaller amounts, quieter losses, all brushed aside with excuses and silence. Each situation was handled privately, never openly discussed, never connected. I realized I wasn't special. I was simply the most recent. That realization landed heavy, but it also clarified everything. For a moment, I felt sick with guilt for not seeing it sooner. I replayed conversations, holidays, and casual moments where this information might have surfaced if I had asked better questions. Then that guilt evaporated. Knowing others had been pulled into the same dynamic made it clear this wasn't about my judgment or my failure. It was about behavior that thrived in secrecy. Manipulation needs isolation to survive. It relies on each person believing they are alone, that speaking up would destroy more than it would fix. That silence had protected her for years, began to understand how carefully that silence was maintained. My mom relied on our fear of exposure, our instinct to protect family reputations at all costs. She knew we would hesitate before comparing notes or risking conflict. She counted on loyalty and shame to keep everyone separated. As long as no one spoke openly, she remained untouchable. Realizing that made something inside me shift. The power she held existed only because we allowed it to continue, also saw my own role in that system. I had helped maintain it by staying quiet, by prioritizing harmony over honesty, by choosing comfort over clarity. That realization was painful but necessary. It showed me how easily good intentions can be turned into tools for harm when someone exploits them patiently. Awareness didn't erase the past, but it changed what I was willing to accept going forward. The moment I stopped protecting her image, the dynamic flipped. I didn't need to threaten or accuse. I simply stopped carrying responsibility for her actions. That release felt strange at first, like stepping into unfamiliar air without a script. Sadness lingered, but it no longer controlled me. Resolve took its place, steady and calm. I wasn't just reacting to a loss anymore. I was standing at the edge of a pattern that needed to end. This stopped being about recovering money. It became about breaking a cycle that had quietly harmed multiple people. I saw how easily it could continue if no one interrupted it. I accepted that the relationship I thought I had never truly existed. It was a role I played in someone else's system, not a bond built on mutual respect. Letting go of that illusion hurt more than the theft itself. But it also freed me. I could finally act based on reality instead of hope. The sadness didn't disappear, but it transformed into clarity. And clarity made the next step unavoidable. Once I accepted that, I made a decision she never expected. The decision didn't arrive with drama. It arrived quietly, one clear morning when I realized reconciliation was no longer my goal. Protection was. I stopped asking myself how to fix the relationship and started asking how to secure my daughter's future. That shift changed everything. Instead of preparing conversations, I prepared actions. I moved carefully, deliberately, without announcing anything. Emotion stayed in the background while logistics took the lead. I began by cutting access. Accounts were restructured, permissions revoked, passwords changed. Every step was methodical and calm. I followed guidance, double-checked details, and left nothing exposed. It felt strange to treat my own mother like a risk factor, but clarity overrode discomfort. I wasn't doing this out of anger. I was doing it out of responsibility. Each change felt like reinforcing a door I didn't realize had been open for years. Detaching emotionally while staying precise was harder than any technical step. I had to resist the urge to explain myself, to soften the blow, to justify boundaries she never respected. I reminded myself that explanations are invitations for negotiation, and I wasn't negotiating anymore. silence became part of the plan. I let actions speak because words had always been twisted. I prepared for backlash without engaging it. I anticipated accusations, guilt, and emotional swings. Instead of responding, I grounded myself in facts. I wrote reminders to myself about why this mattered. When doubt crept in, I pictured my daughter years from now and asked who I wanted to be for her. That answer never wavered. Losing a parent hurt, but losing my child's security would have been unforgivable. The loneliness of that choice settled in slowly. There's a specific kind of isolation that comes from choosing boundaries over belonging. People don't talk about that part enough. I felt untethered, like I had stepped out of a familiar storm into unfamiliar quiet. Strength didn't feel powerful. It felt heavy. But I carried it anyway because it was necessary. Boundaries often feel cruel to people who benefit from your lack of them. I saw that truth unfold quickly. Once my mom realized control was slipping, her tone changed. Calm gave way to urgency. Requests became demands. Concern turned into blame. Watching that shift confirmed everything I needed to know. The mask dropped when it stopped working. For the first time, the power imbalance reversed. I wasn't the one explaining or defending. I wasn't afraid of her reactions. I was anchored in my decision. That steadiness unsettled her more than any argument could have. I saw how much my compliance had propped up her authority, and how fragile it was without it. This was the moment I stopped reacting and started leading my own life again. I chose clarity over comfort, protection over tradition. I didn't know exactly how the fallout would unfold, but I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't going back. She didn't accept that loss quietly. Once the truth surfaced, things didn't explode the way movies make you expect. There were no screaming matches or dramatic confessions. Instead, everything slowly unraveled. My mom's carefully built narrative started to collapse the moment facts replaced stories. When timelines were compared and details no longer lined up, her explanations grew thinner. What once sounded confident began to sound defensive. Silence started filling the gaps where excuses used to live. Family dynamics shifted almost immediately. People who had stayed neutral began asking quiet questions. Not accusations, just clarifications. Questions she couldn't answer without contradicting herself. I watched conversations stall, phone calls shorten, and invitations fade. No one announced a verdict, but conclusions formed anyway. Accountability arrived without confrontation. It showed up as distance. As discomfort. As people choosing not to engage when stories no longer made sense, when I understood something important. Karma isn't always loud. Sometimes it doesn't come with fireworks or punishment. Sometimes it's simply being seen clearly for the first time. The image she worked so hard to maintain cracked under the weight of consistency and truth. Once that happened, she couldn't control how others perceived her anymore. And that loss of control mattered more to her than any argument ever could. While that fallout unfolded, my own life began to stabilize in small but noticeable ways. Removing chaos created space. My days felt quieter. My thoughts stopped looping endlessly. I wasn't waiting for the next emotional swing or bracing for another manipulation. That constant tension I had normalized slowly loosened its grip. Peace didn't arrive all at once, but it arrived steadily. Nothing was magically fixed. The money wasn't fully recovered. The relationship wasn't repaired. But honesty replaced denial, and that changed everything. I stopped carrying responsibility for someone else's behavior. I stopped explaining choices that didn't need justification. My energy returned to places where it actually made a difference, especially with my daughter. I became more present, more patient, more grounded. Justice didn't look the way I once imagined it might. There was no triumphant moment where everything balanced out perfectly. It looked quieter than that. It looked like boundaries holding firm even when tested. It looked like consistency instead of confrontation. It looked like refusing to be pulled back into chaos just to make someone else more comfortable. Watching the consequences unfold taught me something I wish I'd learned sooner. Integrity protects you long after money is gone. It anchors you when relationships shift and narratives change. Standing in truth may cost you familiarity, but it gives you something far more valuable: stability, self-respect, and clarity you can actually build on. As the dust settled, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for what could have been, and relief for what no longer was. I accepted that some endings don't need closure to be complete. They just need honesty and distance. And yet, even then, something remained unresolved. There was still one final conversation left to have. The final confrontation didn't happen the way I once imagined it would. There was no shouting, no dramatic exit, no moment of emotional collapse. When I finally faced my mom again, I wasn't angry. I was clear. That clarity surprised both of us. I spoke slowly, carefully, and without apology. I stated facts, not feelings. I laid out what had happened, what I knew, and what would no longer be allowed. I didn't ask for understanding. I didn't seek validation. I simply named reality and let it sit between us. She tried the familiar strategies at first. Minimizing. Reframing. Suggesting misunderstandings. When that didn't work, she shifted to guilt. She reminded me of history, of sacrifices, of everything she believed she deserved credit for. This time, none of it landed. I didn't argue or defend myself. I repeated my boundaries calmly, like reading terms from a contract that could not be renegotiated. Watching manipulation fail in real time was unsettling, but it confirmed how necessary this moment was. When she realized control was gone, her reaction changed again. Confusion replaced confidence. Anger flickered, then faded. There was no apology, but there was silence. For the first time, she had nothing left to use. That silence told me more than words ever could. I understood then that closure doesn't always come from agreement. Sometimes it comes from recognition. I saw her clearly, and she saw that I could no longer be moved. Walking away felt heavier than staying ever had. I grieved the parent I wished I had, the relationship I hoped might exist someday. Letting go meant accepting that some doors close not because you failed, but because they were never safe to walk through. And yet, as painful as it was also freeing. The weight I carried for years began to lift. I wasn't responsible for fixing what I didn't break. In the aftermath, I reflected deeply on trust, family, and self-respect. I learned that trust without boundaries is not loyalty, it's exposure. I learned that family titles don't excuse harmful behavior. Most importantly, I learned that self-respect isn't selfish, even when it disappoints people you love. It's foundational. Without it, nothing else holds. My daughter's future became my compass through all of this. Every hard decision passed through one question: would this protect her, or put her at risk? That clarity guided me when emotions tried to cloud my judgment. I wanted her to grow up seeing what healthy boundaries look like, even when they're difficult. I wanted her to learn that love and safety should coexist, not compete. Survival sometimes means choosing truth over tradition. It means breaking cycles instead of preserving appearances. It means accepting that some lessons come at a cost you never planned for. Losing money hurt, but losing clarity would have hurt more. Some lessons drain your account. Others save your life. If you're watching this and seeing pieces of your own story reflected back at you, I want you to know something. You're not wrong for protecting yourself. You're not cruel for setting boundaries. And you're not alone for feeling conflicted. Love without respect is not love. It's control disguised as obligation. I didn't tell this story for sympathy. I told it because silence protects the wrong people. If sharing this helps even one person choose themselves sooner, then it was worth it. You deserve safety, honesty, and peace, even when claiming them feels terrifying. So I'll leave you with the question that changed everything for me. If this happened to you, would you choose blood or boundaries?